Yeah, so just in case you wondered in here, I am going to be speaking for the next 30 minutes or so about my necklace. And I've used a lot of tech to make this necklace responsive to people that are around me. Yeah, it's got all the buzzwords in here. So I have a camera that's on this choker that's attached to a Raspberry Pi. It's taking a picture every couple of seconds. And I have a Raspberry Pi attached to me here. And it's running Node.js, TensorFlow.js, and an image recognition model. And this model determines when it gets the picture how many people it's seeing. And then it sends that information to an Adrenal here. And the Adrenal is controlling the lights on the necklace. And basically, I send a message from the Pi to the Adrenal. It tells it how many people are around me, and it responds accordingly based on parameters that I've set. If you don't know who I am, I'm Stephanie. I am a web developer. I live in Berlin. I work on an app at Microsoft called To Do. And my pronouns are she, her. Oh, okay. So a few years, sorry. Goes along with the slide. So a few years ago, I started making lighted clothing as an experiment. Well, first, I thought it was really beautiful when I started seeing things on Twitter, what people were making. But I also have this kind of fascination with making myself uncomfortable in public. I don't actually like to draw attention to myself, but I tend to like things that do, like my hair and my clothes and things. And yeah, lighted clothing, I just thought it was really beautiful. And I really like wearing them, but it's also kind of hard for me to deal with the attention that they draw. But I try to use it as a way to like channel that anxiety I get into kind of this fascination and excitement that I have about exploring and confronting my own discomfort from the attention that they attract. And I didn't start by building something like this. I want to just go over how I kind of got started building lighted clothing. So this is the first project ever I made, and this was not an original idea. I was going to a music festival, and I'm kind of sheltered, and I thought that's just kind of what you did, and I copied a Instructables tutorial, like step by step. I just bought this pre-made kit. That's a link to the kit. If you want to make something like this, you are welcome to copy this. I bought a kit, and my mom made the dress for me, and then I sewed all of those strands. They're fiber optic strands attached to the head of like a flashlight, so it shines light through. And I just sewed all of those strands onto this dress. And it was the first time wearing something like this, and it was weird. And I felt really awkward, but people really responded to it. People want to come up to you, and they want to talk about it. And it was like a self-esteem boost for me. But it was kind of static. Like I would set a program, and there was no like interaction with it besides just people coming up to say like, "Hey, I like your dress." And I really wished it was more live and it had a bit of interactivity to it. So the next thing I built was this whole outfit. So these are each individual pieces that I made. And I gave some talks about this at a bunch of JavaScript conferences. That's a link to my talk at JSConf.eu if you want to check it out. But basically, I have all these individual pieces that I made with lights, and there's an app to control the lights. And anyone on the web could go to the app and select colors and patterns, and then it would send it to my outfit. And there was lots of coding involved with this. The app was built in React, and on the back end, it was using Node.js and MQTT for messaging, and of course, lots of Adrenos. It was also a lot of soldering. It was a really ambitious project for me. And my intent with this project was that I wanted something interactive, but I also wanted to purposely explore creating like this temporary ephemeral experience that would connect the viewer, so people I would interact with my artwork, my clothing, for a brief moment. And I really was interested in exploring reactions when people realized that they could control, I had no control over my own clothing, that they had complete control and they could change it with an app. Also kind of blur the line of like who is the artist and who is at that point, because if they're providing the input on the colors, I really feel like they were the artist at the time, even though I built it. But I found in this project that I was doing it more to please other people, which was okay, but it was really less of the direction I wanted to go in. I really wanted to focus on me and kind of explore like my reactions to this attention and make the experience a bit more about myself. So last year, this is one of the last projects I built before this one. So I don't have sound, but I tried to close caption it for you. I'm just basically saying I like turtles. And so I made a necklace that would show images that would correlate to the words that I were saying. Oh, it actually is saying it. Oops. I didn't realize the video has sound. Anyway, so I did it in an attempt to see if... I can't turn it off. To have people follow along and pay attention to me as I was speaking. So it's a Raspberry Pi with a touch screen and a microphone attached to it, and it's running a Node.js server, and it's sending... Can we mute the sound? Or no? I saw my device. Shit. Anyway, so it was sending this information to the Google Speech Recognition API, and then I was getting back a response to that and sending it to the Google Custom Image Search, and then that's how it would show the images. And when I say I like turtles, it's showing, if you're not familiar, that's a meme where there's a kid dressed as a zombie and he says, I like turtles. So that's why it's showing this. And reason I bring this up is, I accidentally made a thing with machine learning and hadn't even realized it before. And I bring this up because I'm going to talk about machine learning the rest of my project. And it's just ironic to me that when I was building this, I kind of didn't realize I was working with machine learning. I was just making API calls. So I really didn't register, even though I'm dev, it really didn't register how much machine learning I was using here. And I guess it kind of goes to show how pervasive machine learning can be. I just thought I was using an API, sending data and getting a response. Okay. So yeah, and this is a project that I've made now, and I wanted to take the things that I liked about the other projects, interactivity, but I didn't want to depend on APIs. I didn't want to have to depend on a network connection. I wanted to kind of go in this different direction where it's more about me. And so I wanted to make it responsive to people around me. So it increases my discomfort until I conform to social norms. So what that means is, as you can see right now, it's dark in here. The camera is probably not, it's not registering anyone. So I wanted it to be really chaotic and colorful and vibrant when I'm not around people. And it would only calm down, and it'll eventually turn off when I hit a certain number of people. And I set that threshold as 6 people because, honestly, having more than 6 people around me does the opposite effect. So it's less about purposely using light to attract people. It's more about me wanting to get rid of the lights as soon as possible. And I think this sounds really convincing, and it could be a really the main convincing reason why I built this necklace, but it's a little misleading because I actually decided to build this necklace when I started working at Microsoft last year. And when I started there, if you're not familiar with me, I'm a career changer. I don't have a CS background. I've worked at a bunch of smaller companies, and then I got this opportunity to work at a big tech company, and I really just had a moment of self-doubt and feeling of inadequacy. I felt really insecure as a dev because there's really good devs on my team. And the folks at my site, they started this machine learning study group. And I joined it as well. And from the first study session, I was already falling behind. And I really wanted to prove to myself that I could learn all these machine learning concepts, but just do it in my own way. Because if you can't tell, I kind of do things my own way, usually. And for me, that meant I really needed to have a project. I needed to have like a physical, artistic use case for machine learning that was relevant to me and my interests. And so that's like the real reason that I built this. So resources that helped me. The first course that really helped me is this course called Machine Learning from Artists. It's by this great instructor at NYU called Gene Kogan. And it really opened my eyes to what artists and creative technologists are doing with machine learning. And it gave me a lot of ideas how I could integrate machine learning into a new project. So when I started watching these, it's just videos you can watch for free online. I even, they have, just software that you can just integrate without very much coding. And I just used this open frameworks, like facial recognition, and trained it just in a software program called Wekinator. And then I had this headpiece that I had made for, another project for the Haute Couture project. And I could just quickly train it to the harder I smile, the brighter the lights would get. And I just thought that was just really cool. But I didn't want to rely on just some black box software program. I wanted to really code things myself. So the next course I looked at was, this is Dan Schiffman. He does Coding Train, also a creative technologist. And this is where I knew that I want to do all the I'm a web developer. I wanted to do all the machine learning in JavaScript. And I knew that TensorFlow.js was the library to do that in JavaScript. So I started watching his videos to get familiar with using TensorFlow.js. And when I started, there was a couple things that were blockers for me that I wasn't sure of, that I knew that I needed to figure out first. The first was TensorFlow.js is really geared towards the browser and not the backend. And I knew that I was going to run this on hardware, like a Raspberry Pi. So I knew I couldn't use a browser and a webcam. So the first thing I had to figure out was how to get all the machine models running in Node.js instead of the browser. And then also, I didn't even know if you could run TensorFlow.js in Node on a Pi. So those are the first things I needed to figure out. So I had to find a model to use. So I found this one just pre-trained. I didn't need to train anything, called Tiny YOLO. Stands for You Only Look Once. And I just chose this. It has a really small subset of images it's trained on, but one of those images is people. So I knew it would work for me, and it's one of the faster ones in the browser, so I figured that would translate over for Node in the backend. But it was written for the browser. So I had to figure out how to get it running in Node. And if you're interested in doing that yourself, I'll just let you know it's not that terrible. There was just minor code changes that I needed to do to run the browser-based models in Node. So I had to use, they have a special package in the TensorFlow.js for Node. I needed to use that instead of just the one for the browser. I needed to store the models locally on my Pi instead of fetching them over the web. And normal Node stuff like modifying, you can't use import-export Node, so just changing those to requiring packages, and also loading in an image directly, and because I couldn't use the browser API, the webcam, the media devices get user media functionality. And you can see with all these console log statements, I did get this running, and when I trained this, it thought there was probably some ties and a person in the picture that I took at the time. So after I got the models running in Node, I needed to get TensorFlow.js running on the Raspberry Pi. And I kind of started this without kind of checking too much in like the TensorFlow library, but I got really, really fortunate that the TensorFlow JS had, some other people had been asking for the ability to run TensorFlow JS on a Raspberry Pi. So just 5 days before I started this, they hadn't released a build, but in their just the master branch on GitHub, they had added it in. They had just merged this pull request where, so ARM is just the operating system architecture for Raspberry Pis. So this small change made it possible to theoretically run TensorFlow JS on a Raspberry Pi. But I had to do some small things because it wasn't actually released yet. So that just meant that I had to just use another package to build this directly, the TensorFlow JS node library directly on the Pi. But I did it, and I got it to run. And I just want to add a disclaimer that I did this in January, February, so I'm running on 0.14.2 TensorFlow JS. The latest release is they had a major release since then. It was 1.31 is the current one, and they're also prepping a release candidate 2.0 right now. But honestly, this is a personal project. It doesn't matter. It works. It's reliable. I have to look down and check that it's still running. And yeah, I just don't feel like the pressure to like keep up with it. It runs. I did this months ago. I don't want to mess with it. There's other things that I need to always be fixing on this. Yeah, so those were like my two main hurdles, and I felt like a lot more in control of the rest of the build because I had worked with LEDs and hardware before. So I wanted to start building the actual necklace. And I wanted to reuse things that I already had, because if you work in hardware or you are interested, just you might know that it's kind of like very tempting to like buy all the cool things that you see. So I have a lot of like a hardware drawer with a lot of stuff, and I had these tiles in it called Blinky tiles. They're like a light sculpture kit. It's kind of like a beginner soldering thing. It's just these metal tiles, and you can solder them all together and make these cool shapes and sculptures and stuff. And I thought that, and they have these plastic covers on them that diffuse the light really nice, and I thought it would be a really cool necklace. And I also last year, when I bought these, I kind of threw them together on, it comes with their own microcontroller too, and just a pre-programmed light programs, and I just kind of practiced like soldering together to like see if I could use this for a wearable. And so I made something, but it was just all like in their like pre-packaged kit. There wasn't like any code or anything I had written. So I just repurposed this. It kind of got destroyed when I moved to Berlin for my job anyway, so I just kind of reused it. But because I wanted to control it with my own Adrenal, I needed to figure that out. But I mean, I feel like this whole talk is going to be like, luckily I found this. Like, you know, just it's like software development. You just like, you have ideas, but then if you can like build off of what other people have explored and kind of see how other people are doing things, then you can like just go in your own direction using their help. So I just found that someone had like used their own microcontroller for this, and I just tried to follow their code and example. But what I basically found in their code is they were using this library called DMX Simple on Adrenal. And DMX lighting is like the lighting that DJs and theaters use. It's really common, and a lot of people like hack it and want to control it themselves. So, I mean, that's basically what I found, is that they were just using them as like DMX, like theater lighting. So I just quickly soldered like 2 lights together and plugged in an Adrenal and used that sample code and just got mine working. Yeah, and so that was, once I did that, I could start thinking about the actual like design and then start soldering. And when my process for coming up for a design for the necklace is really just, I have a mannequin at home and just kind of pinning things out and seeing how they look. And then I would actually solder on the mannequin to do all this tedious soldering. And the wire is like solid core wiring, so it's giving it a bit of its own structure. So the next thing I needed to do was actually send that image data that I would get from the camera attached to the Pi to the light. So I needed to connect these two separate things together, the Pi with the model and the Adrenal running the necklace. And I had never done that before, and coming from like a non-traditional background, I'm just not so familiar with like hardware and things, but I did find that you can just use serial ports for this, because it's just sending just a small bit of data is just really just perfect for this. And there's 2 pins on the Pi, one for sending and receiving, and the Adrenal has this as well. And it was supposed to be something like really simple to do, but it was really, I had a lot of trouble with this. This was like a really big headache for me. And because I was trying to do this thing called a loopback where you just connect it to its own sending to its receiving, and you can just be able to send a message. And I had to I sent out so many tweets, and people were giving me advice, and it was just actually really tricky. And this doesn't really matter, but I'm just showing you, I had to write a GitHub gist to myself of all the steps that I had to do to get the serial working. I had to update a bunch of config, and then there was a script I have to run on boot, and it was just all this obscure stuff that I didn't know, but luckily I figured that out. If you ever need to do serial on a Raspberry Pi, please tweet at me. I can share this with you. So after that hiccup, things were going okay, but I found when I was hooking them together that there was issues on the necklace. So I was having power issues on my necklace. It was not supposed to strobe like this. And I kind of thought I knew what the problem was, but I really wasn't sure. I thought it was power issues. So I don't know. I didn't really want to invest too much time in it. So I just switched boards, and this was actually a really smart move. And I was lucky that the board I had laying around, which is this is the one that I use. It's a Teensy 3.2. It uses 3.3 volts, but it also is 5 volt tolerant. And this is the Adafruit Mini Metro. It's 5 volts. And what I found, I just got lucky that I had this board and I switched, but it was a lifesaver. And then I kind of realized after I did it what the problem was. These lights need 5. They run on 5 volts. And this, even though it was it just wasn't a voltage match. And this was, but I just kind of didn't realize that until after I switched it. But yeah. And the second problem is that the Raspberry Pi would crash. It had a huge memory leak. I was monitoring using HTOP here. And eventually this memory here would fill up, and then the swap memory would fill up, and it would completely crash. And all I could see was that, I just had a Node app running, and I found some little small bugs in my code that I fixed, but I still just had this huge memory leak. And it took a lot of debugging, but remember this project? So this was also using a Raspberry Pi. Well, I had used, for this project, the same Raspberry Pi and the same memory card. And it turns out, and this was also a Node app, it turns out that this was still, I hadn't disabled this with, I was booting it up with PM2 on startup just to start the program. And I didn't realize that this program actually had a huge memory leak. And I missed it in HTOP because they were both just saying, hey, there's Node app.js running. And both of my programs were named app.js. So I eventually figured it out. I wasted so much time on that, honestly. But I learned how to use HTOP and debug things, which was cool. So the next thing I fixed those problems, and my Raspberry Pi wasn't eventually crashing after 30 minutes anymore. So I was able to move on, and my next thing I needed to do was send the image data from the Pi to the lights. And I was going to use serial ports. I had to figure that out, but I need to think about the format that I was going to use to send the data. And I'm a web developer, so like I use JSON everywhere. I'll just use JSON here, of course. And this was just, yeah, it turns out you can totally have JSON on an Adreno. You probably shouldn't, especially for not what I was doing. But I wrote some code and put it on the Adreno, and it was working. I was getting my JSON object of telling me like people equals 5 on my Adreno. And even though it worked, it was like a really bad decision because it was just, the Adreno is just this tiny, tiny little microcontroller. And it has a single threaded and has very limited resources in memory. And I was sending this big honking piece of like JSON to it. So it would pause, and if you're not familiar with like Adreno, it's just basically running a loop. You have a setup method that runs at the startup when power comes on, and then it just runs a loop. And it just runs that over and over and over again. And so when it would receive a message, it would have to like process all that JSON, and it would cause the light program to pause. And it just was not going to work. I couldn't like, it's getting a message sent to it every few seconds. I couldn't have it just like stop and then start again every time. I thought I was really clever for using JSON on a Adreno because it felt very unique, but it was just a terrible, terrible idea. And so I just really thought about like what information I needed the Adreno to have. It just needed a number. It honestly just needed a number. So I just condensed that down, and instead I'm using node buffers. So I just have a starting number here, and then ending number. So just it looks for those on the Adreno to know that it's getting a new message. And then I just send a byte with the person count. So I'm sending 3 bytes. There's no hiccups on the Adreno anymore. No need for me to be clever. Like, this is all the information I needed to send. So next, I just worked on programming the Adreno, and so it would change programs based on the number of people it was seeing. And this is like a lot of non-JavaScript stuff. It's a bunch of just like poorly written C++-ish code on an Adreno. I've only learned C++ to be able to do stuff on Adreno. So I'm not going to show you a bunch of code, but I'll just kind of show you like the main program that I wrote that is just setting the program. So at this point it's already gotten like a message, and then it's just has some parameters, and then it's just honestly just on the number of people changing. And as you can see, I have kind of 2 options. Like, one is like if I want it to be calm when people are around me, which is what I have now, that is just as the number of people increases, it will calm down and eventually go to dark mode where there's more than 6 people. And then also I have the opposite, that I can also switch it so that it can be off when no one's around, and then get more chaotic when there's more than 6 people around. So it just gets a message, gets that people count, and just updates the program. That's it. You're welcome. I also have these URLs that are listed at the end of my talk, but if you want to see like Adreno code, you can go to there. I'll show this again at the end. And once again, like, I made some steps forward, but not without making like some steps back. So I tested it, and I had more issues. So I had some bad connections. So the lights were shorting and like flickering as I was moving around. It was really uncomfortable to wear. Probably shouldn't have just put it on a mannequin and not like actually test fitted it on myself until the very end. But yeah, so I needed to solve those problems. So my first idea when I was building this was not this girdle around my waist. I thought I would just put everything in like a fanny pack, like a nice fanny pack on my side. But I mean, the Pi is huge. I have a battery pack. I have the Adreno. I have all these cables. Like, it just wasn't going to work. So I just got the girdle instead and sewed some elastic so I can kind of just stuff things in around me. It's actually pretty comfortable where, especially if I go outside and it's cold, then I have this like nice, like this little computer keeping me warm. Yeah, and then I just had to touch up on my soldering and yeah, kind of trickier bits. There's a tip if you work with wires, you can just put a little hot glue around those connections to just strengthen them to keep things from like moving around. And so the last thing I decided to do, I hadn't really planned for this when I started building, but sometimes I get, like this is just too much for me. It just drains me and I just can't deal with like the attention or having this on anymore. And I want to at least be able just to impromptu turn it off. So the last thing I added that I hadn't planned for was I have this button ring. So if I just press it like a long press, it goes completely off and then I can put it back on. And then this is how I can also flip between my programs. So this is like the calm when no one's around, that goes like more chaotic as more people around, and then I can switch it back and forth. Yeah, and this is just some code for that. So yeah, I just have some methods. So it just handles like these short button presses, and then it just, the Adrenal just in that loop is just like, looks to see if it's getting, it just basically has like a timer and it flips a variable, and if it's long enough, then it'll trigger either one of these. Yeah. And I'm kind of at the end of my talk. And I just want to say that, as you can tell by kind of like the time between my commits, like this project was hard, and I got demotivated a lot. And I wanted to do this in 3 months, and it took me 8 months to build this. And there was always stuff I could have done differently with the coding and building, but I did it, and at the end, that's all that really matters. And yeah, I just kind of want to say if like something's hard, then it's okay. And if it takes longer than you expected, that's okay. And actually, I think those breaks were really good because as you can see, I kind of got stuck on things between like the serial messages and bytes and also dealing with like the power issues. And I think I actually came back and like could think clear about things, even though it took me like over twice as long as I wanted this to take me. So I just want to say thank you. And here's the links to the 2 repos. If you want to go poke at my code, you're welcome to. If you want to steal it or borrow it, you're welcome to do that as well. I forgot to lay them out, but I also have stickers if you want some. I have, there's this nice organization called Queer.js that does meetups where the speakers are queer people. And I have some of those stickers, and then also, yeah, so I'll lay those out after my talk, which is done now. Yeah, so thank you.